10 ancient sites permanently sealed after what was found inside. Number 10. The Cochno Stone. In a quiet corner of West Dunbartonshire, on the edge of a housing estate near the village of Faifley, there is a sheet of rock that for half a century had nothing on its surface worth looking at. There was nothing to look at because there was nothing to see. The stone was under the ground, deliberately. The Cochno Stone is a single slab of sandstone roughly 13 meters long and almost 8 meters wide, a flat, exposed surface larger than the floor of a modern two-bedroom apartment. Across that surface spreads one of the densest concentrations of prehistoric carving anywhere in Europe. Dozens of cup and ring marks, spirals, grooves, and concentric circles cover the rock, cut by people who lived here approximately 5,000 years ago, in the late Neolithic or early Bronze Age. They worked the stone with nothing harder than stone, pecking each ring into the sandstone by hand. And the result is so dense and so accomplished that one early observer called it the finest set of cup and ring marks in existence. No one knows what the marks mean. That sentence sounds like a failure, but it is the honest center of the whole story. In 1937, an antiquarian named Ludovic McClellan Mann arrived convinced that he could decode it. He believed the carvings recorded a prehistoric cosmology, a story in which a monster swallowed the sun during an eclipse and then spat it back out. And he believed the pattern was a kind of astronomical calendar. To prove it, he painted the grooves. He picked out the cup and ring marks in white, then covered the entire slab in a spectacular yellow grid of his own invention, lines that existed nowhere on the original rock. His paint was speculation dressed as measurement, but it had one accidental effect. It made the stone famous. And fame for a piece of exposed prehistoric rock sitting beside a growing town turned out to be a death sentence. By the 1960s, the slab had been scratched with graffiti, chipped by visitors, and ground down by weather and footsteps. The carvings that had survived 5,000 Scottish winters were being erased inside a single human generation. So in 1965, a team of archaeologists made a decision that sounds like surrender, but was actually protection. They buried it. They covered the entire panel under a thick layer of soil and turf and left it there, hidden, unreachable, intact. For about half a century, the most important carved stone in the region simply did not exist in public view. Then, in the autumn of 2016, archaeologist Kenny Brophy of the University of Glasgow, working with the Factum Foundation, reopened it. Over roughly 3 weeks, his team cleared the soil, recorded every groove with high-resolution three-dimensional scanning, captured even the faded ghosts of man's painted grid, and produced a complete digital twin of the surface, accurate to fractions of a millimeter. And then, they buried it again. That is the part worth sitting with. After all the technology, all the scanning, all the careful documentation, the considered professional verdict was that the safest place for the Cochno Stone is back under the dirt, invisible, sealed away from the public that wanted to admire it. The interpretations of what the marks actually meant remained as open as ever. Man's eclipse theory has no real support today. Some archaeologists read the symbols as territorial or ritual markers, others as expressions tied to water, death, or the movement of the sun and moon across the year. And the most defensible position is the least satisfying one. We do not know. We may never know. The people who carved them left no key. So the stone was not reburied because of what it might reveal. It was reburied because of what we do to things we are allowed to touch. The danger was never vandalism alone, or weather alone. It was us, simply being present, wearing the carvings away, one admiring visit at a time. In Scotland, the threat was spray paint and boot heels, and the answer was a layer of soil. But the same instinct, the same reluctant sealing of something irreplaceable, was about to repeat itself across Europe for a reason far more intimate. In a cave in France, the danger was not vandals with knives. It was the breath of the people who came to fall in love with it. Number 9. Lascaux. In September of 1940, 4 teenagers and a dog stumbled into a hole in the wooded hills above the Vézère Valley in southwestern France. At the bottom of that hole was a chamber, and on the walls of that chamber were horses, bulls, stags, and aurochs painted in ochre and charcoal approximately 17,000 years ago. The Lascaux cave contains some of the most accomplished Paleolithic art ever found, a gallery of nearly 2,000 figures rendered with a confidence that collapses the distance between us and the people who made them. The central chamber, the Hall of the Bulls, carries one bull figure over 5 meters long, the largest animal image known in cave art. These were not primitive scratches. This was a tradition with mastery already inside it. The cave was opened to the public in 1948, and the public came. At its peak, Lascaux received up to 1,200 visitors every single day, a steady river of admirers filing past paintings that had spent 17,000 years in perfect, sealed darkness. Each of those visitors did something completely ordinary and quietly catastrophic. They breathed. The arithmetic of that breathing is brutal. 1,200 people a day, each exhaling carbon dioxide and water vapor, each radiating body heat, walking through a space the size of a few rooms that had never known a breath of warm, modern air. By the mid-1950s, the damage was visible on the walls. 2 afflictions appeared. The first was the maladie verte, the green sickness, a spread of algae feeding on the visitor lighting and the exhaled carbon dioxide. The second was the maladie blanche, the white sickness, a veil of calcite crystallizing over the pigments like frost over a photograph. In 1963, France's first Minister of Culture, the novelist André Malraux, ordered Lascaux sealed against the public entirely. There would be no reduced visitor numbers and no tighter ticketing this time. The cave was simply closed, and it has stayed closed ever since. The chamber that had outlasted the last ice age, the rise and fall of every civilization since, and 17,000 years of geological time, had nearly been dissolved within 15 years of being admired. The cave had outlasted the glaciers. It very nearly did not outlast being loved. But here is where Lascaux stops being a closed case and becomes an ongoing emergency. Sealing the cave did not end the war. Beginning around 2001, a white mold identified as Fusarium solani bloomed across the floors and ledges, and soon after, a darker invader followed. Black stains produced by melanized fungi, including a species new to science that was named Ochroconus lascauensis after the cave it was strangling. Decades of aggressive chemical treatment, antibiotics, quicklime, fungicide patches, sometimes made the problem worse by killing one organism and clearing the way for another. The cave became a microbiological battlefield whose ecology the experts were still learning in real time. Today, the strategy has reversed entirely. The keepers no longer try to sterilize Lascaux. They try to keep it balanced. A small team enters only every 2 weeks, dressed in hooded biohazard suits, booties, and face masks, to remove fungal filaments from the walls by hand, one patch at a time, like surgeons tending a patient who can never be cured, only stabilized. The public sees none of this. They visit a replica, Lascaux II, opened in 1983 a short distance away, where the paintings are copied with such precision that most visitors never feel the loss. They are admiring a photograph of a grave they are no longer allowed to enter. Lascaux taught an entire generation of archaeologists a permanent and humbling lesson. The most dangerous thing you can do to a fragile ancient site is let people in to enjoy it. But contaminated air, at least, kills slowly over years and decades. In a royal tomb in Poland, the thing waiting in the sealed dark would prove that some discoveries do not wait at all. Number 8. The tomb of Casimir IV Jagiellon. On Friday the 13th of April, 1973, a team of 12 men assembled inside Wawel Cathedral in Krakow to open a royal tomb. The date would later seem like a detail invented by a screenwriter, but it is real. The tomb belonged to Casimir IV Jagiellon, a king who had ruled Poland in the 15th century and had lain undisturbed beneath the cathedral since his death in 1492. The opening was authorized for conservation with the formal consent of the Archbishop of Krakow, Cardinal Karol Wojtyła, a man who 5 years later would become Pope John Paul II. The team lifted the lid. Inside was the decayed remains of a medieval king, and the work of documentation began. It was routine. It was sanctioned. It was, by every measure available at the time, completely safe. Within a matter of days, 4 of the 12 men were dead. The toll did not stop there. Over the following years, it climbed, and by most accounts, roughly 10 of the 12 who entered the tomb died prematurely, many of them far too young for the deaths to look natural. Counting the conservators and laboratory staff who later handled material from the burial, some estimates put the total number of associated deaths at no fewer than 15. The whispers began almost immediately. A curse. The vengeance of a disturbed king. The Jagiellonian curse, reaching out of a 400-year-old grave to punish the men who had broken its seal. The truth was stranger than a curse, because the truth could be cultured in a laboratory. One of the survivors, the microbiologist Boleslav Smik, investigated what the tomb had actually contained, and the answer was a fungus. The sealed chamber, undisturbed across nearly 5 centuries, had become a perfect incubator for Aspergillus flavus, a mold that produces a class of compounds called aflatoxins. Aflatoxins are among the most potent natural carcinogens ever identified, gram for gram devastating to the liver, and they ride invisibly in the dust and spores that a sealed organic space accumulates over 400 years. The men opened the lid and inhaled a chamber's worth of them in their first breaths. It was not a spell. It was not a punishment. It was biology, patient and invisible, doing exactly what biology does in a warm, sealed, organic dark. And the case quietly rewrote one of the most famous legends of the 20th century. When Lord Carnarvon and several others died after the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb in the 1920s, the world called it the Mummy's Curse and sold newspapers on it for decades. Modern researchers point to the same mechanism that killed the men at Wawel, the toxic molds that flourish in sealed ancient chambers and wait, dormant and lethal, for the first lungful of fresh air to set them loose. The curse, in other words, was real. It simply had a Latin name and a spore count, and it answered not to magic, but to mycology. The fungus thrived precisely because the tomb had been sealed and left alone. But sealing is not always something the living do to the dead. Sometimes, the people who build a sacred site seal it themselves with their own hands and leave no explanation we can read. On a hilltop in Turkey lies the oldest and most argued over example we have ever found. Number 7. Göbekli Tepe. On a limestone ridge in southeastern Turkey, overlooking the plains near the city of Şanlıurfa, stand circles of massive T-shaped stone pillars, some of them more than 5 meters tall and weighing as much as 10 tons, carved with foxes, scorpions, vultures, and snakes. The site is called Göbekli Tepe, and when the German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt of the German Archaeological Institute began systematic excavations there in 1995, he understood almost immediately that he was looking at something the textbooks said should not exist. The pillars are approximately 11,000 years old. To make that number physical, hold 2 comparisons side by side. Göbekli Tepe predates Stonehenge by roughly 6,000 years. It predates the invention of writing by a span longer than all of recorded history laid end to end. And it was raised by people who had no pottery, no metal, no wheel, and, as far as the evidence shows, no farming and no permanent cities. They were hunter-gatherers, and yet they quarried, shaped, transported, and stood upright monumental stone columns as heavy as a loaded truck, arranged in deliberate rings, a feat the textbooks insisted was impossible without agriculture and settled society to organize the labor. It is, by a wide margin, the oldest monumental sanctuary ever discovered. But the detail that genuinely unsettles archaeologists is not how the site was built. It is how it ended. At some point after roughly 8,000 years before the Common Era, the great stone enclosures vanished beneath the earth, packed full of rubble, soil, animal bones, and broken tools, buried so completely that for 10,000 years the hill above them looked like nothing more than a rounded natural mound. And here the story splits. because this is where serious archaeologists genuinely disagree, and the disagreement matters. Klaus Schmidt believed the burial was deliberate, a vast act of intentional decommissioning, the builders ceremonially entombing their own temple by hand when its purpose was complete. It was a haunting idea, and for years it was the standard account. But Schmidt died in 2014, and the researchers who continued his work, among them Lee Clare and Moritz Kinzel, began to question it. They noticed that the fill is not distributed the way an intentional burial would be. It is heaviest against the upslope side of the enclosures and thinner elsewhere, exactly the pattern you would expect not from reverent human hands, but from sediment and debris washing down the hillside over centuries, sliding into the hollows the way a dry riverbank slumps into a ditch. Neither side has won. The deliberate burial theory still has defenders. The slope wash theory has gathered momentum and evidence. What is undisputed is the result. Whether by ceremony or by erosion, the first great sacred architecture of humankind ended up sealed beneath the ground, intact. And that sealing, intended or not, is the only reason it survived 11,000 years for us to find. There is a quiet irony in it. The most important religious site in human prehistory may owe its survival not to worship, but to mud. And there is one more echo worth noting. When modern archaeologists finished studying the excavated enclosures, they faced frost, rain, and erosion eating at the newly exposed stone, and they made a decision the ancient builders may or may not have made before them. They reburied large sections of the site under protective fabric and gravel, on purpose to keep it safe. Cover it, keep it, trust the dark. Göbekli Tepe's builders raised the first temple and then disappeared from history. In the limestone hills of France, modern scientists would face an even older treasure, and they would choose to seal it not after centuries of debate, but within hours of first setting foot inside. Number 6. The Chauvet Cave. On the 18th of December, 1994, 3 cave explorers, Jean-Marie Chauvet, Eliette Brunel, and Christian Hilaire, felt a faint draft of air rising from a pile of rubble in a gorge in the Ardèche region of southern France. To a caver, moving air means one thing: hidden space. They cleared the debris, squeezed through a narrow gap, and lowered themselves into a darkness that no human had entered in tens of thousands of years. When their lamps came up, the walls came alive. What they found has no real rival anywhere on Earth. The Chauvet Cave carries more than 1,000 images: lions hunting in packs, woolly rhinoceroses locked head-to-head in combat, horses, mammoths, bears, and cave hyenas, drawn with shading, perspective, and a sense of motion so sophisticated that when the dates first came back, some specialists refused to believe them. But the dates held, confirmed by radiocarbon analysis of the pigments themselves. The oldest paintings in Chauvet are approximately 32,000 to 36,000 years old. That places them among the very earliest figurative art our species ever made, nearly twice the age of Lascaux. To grasp the gap, consider this. More time separates the Chauvet painters from the Lascaux painters than separates the Lascaux painters from us. This is not the clumsy beginning of art. This is mastery, standing already complete at what we thought was the dawn. And the 3 people who found it understood almost at once the weight of what they were holding. They had the example of Lascaux behind them, and Altamira in Spain before that. 2 masterpieces very nearly breathed to death by adoring crowds. So Jean-Marie Chauvet and his companions did something unusual for discoverers. They were careful. They moved along the edges. They protected the floor. And the French authorities, learning the lesson Lascaux had taught in blood, made a decision without precedent in scale. They would never open Chauvet to the public. Not on a limited basis. Not by lottery. Not for heads of state or special guests. Never. The cave was sealed behind a heavy steel door. Its interior climate, temperature, humidity, and carbon dioxide is monitored continuously by sensors. Only a small number of scientists are permitted inside, only a few days a year, and even they move along narrow, raised metal walkways so that no human foot ever touches the original floor where the painters once stood. To give the public something, France built a vast replica nearby, The Caverne du Pont d'Arc opened in 2015, roughly 10 times larger than the Lascaux facsimile and reproducing the art down to the texture of the rock. The difference between Lascaux and Chauvet is the difference between a lesson learned too late and a lesson applied in time. Lascaux was closed after the damage was already done. Chauvet was closed before a single visitor could exhale on a single wall. It is, in a strange and precise sense, the most important art gallery on Earth, and almost no living human will ever be permitted to see the originals with their own eyes. We finally understood the cost of looking, and so we paid it in advance by agreeing never to look. Chauvet was sealed to protect what is inside from us. The next site was sealed to protect something too, but with a crucial difference. There, no one can agree on what the something is, and the highest court of an entire nation has formally refused to let anyone find out. Number 5. Vault B of the Padmanabhaswamy Temple. In the city of Tiruvananthapuram, in the southern Indian state of Kerala, stands the Sri Padmanabhaswamy Temple, an ancient and immensely sacred site dedicated to the god Vishnu, whose central image lies in eternal cosmic sleep. Beneath its stone floor sits a series of sealed underground vaults, and for centuries those vaults were left untouched, guarded by tradition and by the temple's royal custodians, the former rulers of Travancore. People knew the chambers were there. Almost no one had seen inside them. In 2011, following a petition and an order from the Supreme Court of India, a team of observers opened 5 of the 6 known vaults. What they found reset the meaning of the word treasure. Inside were sacks of gold coins, solid gold idols, crowns and ornaments studded with diamonds, ropes of emeralds, and ceremonial objects of staggering antiquity. An accumulation of wealth so vast that the value of what came out of a single vault, Vault A, is commonly estimated at around $22 billion. To put that one chamber in perspective, its contents are worth more than the entire annual economic output of many small nations. It is widely described as the largest single hoard of precious objects ever documented at one location in recorded human history, and it came out of just one room. And then there was the 6th chamber, Vault B. When the team approached Vault B, they did not find an ordinary door. They found a barrier unlike the others. Its surface is carved with the images of 2 enormous cobras, a motif known as the Naga Bandham, the serpent seal, and according to temple tradition, the door is held shut not by any lock or bolt, but by the power of a tantric ritual, sealed by sound, by mantra, by something no locksmith is equipped to address. There is no visible keyhole, there is no obvious mechanism. By the accounts that exist, it simply will not open. And before anyone could force the question, the temple's royal family obtained an injunction from the Supreme Court itself, arguing that breaking the seal would violate sacred custom and risk consequences no one could measure. In 2020, the Supreme Court of India delivered its position. It restored the royal family's role as the deity's earthly custodian, and it declined to order Vault B opened. The chamber would remain closed, out of respect for religious sentiment and the sanctity of the temple. The court that could compel almost anything chose, in effect, to leave one door alone. What lies behind it is genuinely unknown, and the speculation runs in 2 directions that could not be further apart. One camp believes Vault B conceals the greatest concentration of wealth in the entire temple, treasure that could push the total valuation past $1 trillion and dwarf everything already recovered. The other camp, including some who take the warning seriously, believes the seal exists for a reason, and that some chambers are sealed precisely because what guards them is not meant to be tested. Both positions share one feature. Neither can be checked without opening the door, and the law has decided the door stays shut. So in a temple where every other sealed vault gave up a fortune, one door held. And the considered choice of an entire legal system was to let it keep holding. Some questions, the court effectively ruled, are worth more unanswered. Vault B is sealed behind iron and serpents that we are choosing not to break. The next chamber is sealed behind something far more absolute, 140 meters of solid limestone. And we found it without disturbing a single block, using particles born in the death of distant stars. Number 4. The Scan Pyramid's Big Void. The Great Pyramid of Khufu at Giza has been measured, mapped, tunneled, and picked over for the better part of 2 centuries. And by the modern era, the consensus was settled. Its interior held no more secrets. Every major chamber, the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, had been entered and surveyed. There was, the experts agreed, nothing left to find inside the most famous structure of the ancient world. That consensus ended on the 2nd of November 2017 with a paper published in the journal Nature. A team working under the Scan Pyramids project, including the physicist Kunihiro Morishima of Nagoya University in Japan, had been doing something the pyramids builders could not have imagined in their most elaborate dreams. They placed sheets of nuclear emulsion film, detectors sensitive to subatomic particles called muons, inside the Queen's Chamber, deep in the heart of the stone. Muons rain down constantly on every square meter of the Earth's surface, created when cosmic rays from deep space, many of them flung outward by exploded stars, slam into the upper atmosphere. These particles pass through solid rock, but they are absorbed slightly more by dense stone than by empty air. By counting how many muons arrived from each direction, the team could effectively X-ray the pyramid, using the radiation of the cosmos as their light source. What the muons revealed was a void, a large, previously unknown empty space, at least 30 meters long, with a cross-section comparable to the Grand Gallery itself, hidden in the masonry above that gallery. 30 meters is the length of a cathedral nave, or a row of city buses parked end to end, sealed inside solid rock with no known door, no corridor, and no way in. This was the first major internal structure discovered in the Great Pyramid since the 19th century, and the finding did not rest on one instrument. It was confirmed by 3 independent muon technologies operated by separate teams: nuclear emulsion films, scintillator hodoscopes, and gas detectors positioned both inside and outside the pyramid. 3 methods, 3 teams, 1 void. Not a crack, not a settling fault in the stone. A space large enough to swallow a building, sealed inside a monument approximately 4,500 years old. And the story did not end in 2017. The same project kept its detectors running, and in March of 2023, the team confirmed a second anomaly near the pyramid's north face, a corridor roughly 9 meters long, and this time they pushed an endoscope through a tiny gap and photographed the inside, a vaulted stone ceiling no human eye had seen since the pyramid was built. That smaller corridor we have now glimpsed. The big void above the Grand Gallery we still have not. We can see its shadow in the muon data. We cannot reach it, and as of now, no one has agreed on a safe way to try. What it contains, if it contains anything at all, remains exactly as hidden as it was the day the last casing stone was set in place. Cosmic rays that began their journey before human civilization existed passed cleanly through the largest stone structure of antiquity and outlined a room that has been sealed since before the next dynasty of pharaohs was born. The void in the pyramid appears, as far as the physics can tell, to be empty. The next sealed chamber was not empty. It held a woman, and the people who buried her packed the entire room around her with a brilliant red powder that is also a slow poison. Number 3. The Tomb of the Red Queen. In the ruined Maya city of Palenque, deep in the jungles of Chiapas in southern Mexico, there is a modest structure known by the unglamorous label of Temple 13. It stands beside the famous Temple of the Inscriptions, and for decades it drew almost no attention. Then, in the spring of 1994, an archaeologist named Fanny Lopez Jimenez, carrying out stabilization work under the direction of Arnoldo González Cruz of Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History, noticed a narrow crack along an interior wall, half hidden by rubble and weeds. She shone a flashlight into the gap and angled a small mirror to see around the corner. Behind the crack was a sealed passage. Behind the passage was a chamber that no one had entered for roughly 1,300 years. Inside stood a sarcophagus carved from a single block of limestone, and when the lid was carefully raised, the chamber gave up its secret in a way no one was prepared for. The entire interior, the skeleton, the jade ornaments, the pearls, the grave goods, every every surface was coated in a vivid blood-red powder, as if the room had been filled with red dust and then sealed. The remains belonged to an elite woman who had died in her late 50s or 60s, sometime between 600 and 700 in the Common Era, and her people had buried her drowned in red. The powder is cinnabar. Chemically, it is mercury sulfide, a compound of mercury, and it is toxic. To the Maya, it carried profound symbolic weight, the color of blood, of the rising sun, of life renewed, and it was reserved for the highest rank of royalty alone. But symbolism does not neutralize chemistry. When the archaeologists opened the sarcophagus, the disturbance lifted a fine cloud of red dust into the air, and to study the Red Queen at all meant working in respirators inside a sealed room saturated with a mercury compound that had been waiting 13 centuries to be breathed. She had not been buried alone either. 2 other bodies lay with her, an adolescent and an adult, almost certainly sacrificed to accompany her into death. The Red Queen herself is now widely believed to be Lady Ix-Tsakbu Ajao, the wife of Palenque's greatest king, Kinich Janab Pakal, a marriage that bound 2 ruling lines together and produced the heirs who followed him. Remember the cinnabar. Remember that the Maya, on their side of the planet, sealed their most honored dead inside a mercury compound, and that doing so made the tomb itself faintly dangerous to enter. Hold that detail. It is about to return, on the other side of the world, on a scale that turns a single red sarcophagus into an entire underground sea. Because a woman sealed in red poison is unsettling, but she was, in the end, found, studied, and named. The ruler in the final entry sealed himself away so completely and so cleverly that after 50 years of knowing exactly where he lies, we have chosen not even to try to reach him. Number 2. Mount Nemrut. On the summit of a mountain in southeastern Turkey, more than 2,000 meters above sea level, a king built himself a seat among the gods. His name was Antiochus I of Commagene, and in the 1st century before the Common Era, he ruled a small, wealthy kingdom wedged precariously between the Roman and Parthian empires. To make his memory permanent, he ordered the construction of a hierothesion, a combined tomb and sanctuary, on the very peak of Mount Nemrut. He had colossal seated statues of himself and the gods erected there, figures whose heads alone stand as tall as a grown adult, and today those giant stone heads, toppled from their bodies by centuries of earthquakes and scattered across the mountaintop, are among the most haunting images in all of archaeology. Blank-eyed faces staring out over the plains at an altitude where the air goes thin. At the center of the complex, Antiochus raised a tumulus, an artificial mountain stacked on top of the natural one. It is a conical mound of deliberately crushed gravel, approximately 50 meters tall, as high as a 15-story building, and about 150 meters across at its base, heaped by hand above the peak. Somewhere beneath or within that mound, the entire design of the monument implies, lies the burial chamber of the king himself, untouched. The site was brought to Western attention in 1881, but the most determined assault on its secret came in the middle of the 20th century, when the American archaeologist Teresa Gohl devoted years of her life to finding the tomb. Gohl worked through obstacles that would have stopped most people, including severe hearing loss and a brutal mountain environment, and she went at the tumulus with everything available to her. She tunneled into its flank. She drilled boreholes deep into the gravel. She even used explosives against the slope, trying to blast a path toward the chamber she was certain lay inside. The mountain defeated every attempt, and the reason is the gravel itself. The mound is built of loose crushed stone, and loose crushed stone behaves like dry sand. Whenever a tunnel was driven into it, the gravel above simply flowed back down into the opening, collapsing the excavation and refilling the wound as fast as it could be dug. Gohl brought dynamite to a structure that was engineered, perhaps deliberately, to absorb force and heal itself. Not breached, not penetrated, defeated repeatedly by physics. Whether Antiochus and his builders understood that they had created a self-sealing tomb, or whether they simply built a gravel mound and got lucky, the effect is the same. The pile cannot be tunneled because the pile pours itself back into every hole. To this day, the tomb of Antiochus has never been located with certainty. Some researchers now suspect the chamber lies not inside the gravel, but beneath it, or off to one side, protected less by secrecy than by the simple, stubborn behavior of a hill that swallows anyone who digs. Antiochus did not hide his grave behind a door that could be forced. He hid it behind a mountain that seals itself. And 2,000 years later, the mountain is still winning. A king sealed inside a self-healing mound of stone is a remarkable thing. But the greatest sealed site on Earth combines nearly every barrier in this entire countdown at once. The loose earth, the poison, the deliberate refusal, and the force of law over a buried complex the size of a city. And here is what makes it different from Antiochus. We do not have to search for it. We know exactly where it is. We have known for 50 years. We have simply decided not to open it. Number 1. The Mausoleum of Qin Shi Huang. Picture yourself standing on a low, grassy hill on the dry plain outside the city of Xi'an in central China. The hill seems natural, softened by 2,000 years of weather and rooted over with grass. It is not natural. It is the largest tomb mound ever raised in East Asia, an artificial hill, and beneath your feet, sealed in the dark, lies the body of the man who first forged China into a single empire, surrounded by a buried world built to serve him for eternity. In March of 1974, farmers digging a well near that hill struck fragments of fired clay. What they had blundered into became the most famous archaeological discovery of the 20th century. The Terracotta Army, an estimated 8,000 life-size soldiers, along with archers, horses, and chariots, each face individually modeled so that no two warriors are quite the same, standing in silent battle formation in pits beneath the soil. The scale of it stopped the world. 8,000 individual sculptures, an entire army rendered in clay, and that army is only the outer guard. It surrounds and faces outward from the true tomb, the burial mound of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, who died in 210 before the Common Era, who broke the warring states and welded them into one realm, standardized the script, the coinage, and the very width of cart axles, began the first Great Wall, and spent the final years of his life in a frantic, doomed search for the elixir of immortality. That central mound has never been opened. And the reason it stays sealed is written in two sources that agree across more than 2,000 years. One of them ancient, one of them chemical. Around 100 before the Common Era, roughly a century after the emperor's death, the historian Sima Qian described the interior of the tomb. He wrote that the burial chamber held models of the emperor's palaces and the towers of his empire, that the heavens were painted across the ceiling and the lands of China reproduced on the floor below, and that the great rivers and the sea were represented by flowing mercury, made to move mechanically so that the silver liquid coursed through the tomb in an endless artificial current that would never stop. For centuries, this read like myth, the kind of impossible grandeur historians invent for dead kings. Then the soil was tested. Geophysical surveys of the burial mound, beginning around 1981 and reinforced by later studies, found mercury concentrations in the earth above the tomb running to roughly 100 times the natural background level. And the contamination is not spread evenly. It is concentrated, heaviest in some areas and absent in others. And researchers have noted that the pattern of the readings echoes the geography of China itself, with the strongest signals falling where the country's great rivers and eastern coastline would be on a map laid out across the tomb floor. The Mercury Sea that Sima Qian described, dismissed for 2,000 years as legend, appears by every available measurement to be really down there. Now remember the Red Queen. Remember the cinnabar, the mercury compound the Maya sealed their most honored dead inside, on the far side of an ocean neither culture knew the other existed across. Here, the same element fills not a single sarcophagus, but an entire subterranean empire, by the ton, vaporizing slowly in the sealed dark. Two civilizations, separated by the whole width of the world, reached independently for Mercury to guard the passage of a great ruler into death. One queen drowned in red, one emperor floating a poisoned sea. So the tomb stays shut, for two reasons that reinforce each other. The first is lethal and obvious.
Opening a chamber saturated with mercury vapor would endanger everyone near it. But the second reason is the one the archaeologists themselves insist on, and it is the more humbling of the two. When the Terracotta Army was first unearthed in 1974, the figures were not the bare gray we see in photographs today. They were vividly painted, in reds and greens and lavenders and deep blues. And as the excavated surfaces met the dry, open air for the first time in 2,000 years, the lacquer beneath the paint curled, flaked, and lifted away, sometimes within minutes, the color falling off the soldiers faster than anyone could photograph it. We watched an army lose its colors in real time, in front of our own eyes, because we were not ready to preserve them. To open the emperor's tomb now, with the tools we currently possess, would not be a discovery.
It would be a destruction. We would be trading the answer for the thing itself. And so, the most powerful man in the ancient history of China remains exactly where he placed himself, sealed inside a poisoned palace, guarded by an army of clay, beneath a hill we could excavate tomorrow if we were willing to ruin everything inside it. He spent his last years trying to defeat death and to rule without end. And in a strange, accidental way, he has succeeded, because the most advanced civilization in human history has looked at his grave, understood exactly where it is, and decided that he should be left undisturbed. That is perhaps the quiet lesson running beneath all 10 of these sealed places. We tend to imagine that knowledge is always a door to be forced, that every locked chamber is a problem waiting to be solved, that the only failure is the failure to look. But look again at what actually sealed these 10 sites, and a pattern rises to the surface. A toxin in the dust, a breath on a painted wall, a court order, a mound of gravel that pours itself back into every hole, a sea of mercury mapped into rivers. Different centuries, different cultures, different barriers, and the same conclusion reached again and again by people who had every tool to break through and chose instead to stop. But the Cochno Stone went back under the soil. Chauvet was closed on its first day. Lascaux survives only because we abandoned it and now tend it like a dying patient. Göbekli Tepe was saved by being buried, whether by reverent hands or by indifferent mud. The Emperor's Mercury Sea stays sealed by deliberate choice. And every one of these places is still sealed right now as you watch this, the steel door at Chauvet shut. The conservators still entering Lascaux in biohazard suits every 2 weeks. Vault B still unopened behind its carved serpents. Across all of them, the same realization arrives. Some doors we leave shut, not because we lack the strength or the tools to open them, but because we have finally understood what opening them would cost. The deepest measure of how much we have learned is not what we have managed to dig up, it is what we have agreed to leave buried. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.